Chaps, welcome back to SJMMA. Now today, I'm going to do a part 2 on a video that I made last year. About this point in 2023, I tried to predict every pay-per-view main and co-main for this year. I'm going to do it again for 2025. One of the big mistakes I made in last year's video was I didn't recognise that there's normally more than 12 pay-per-views in a UFC calendar year. I know there's 12 months and there's usually one a month, but this year there's 14 for an example, so I've done 14 for next year as well. So let's get into it. January, UFC 311. The only fight on this entire video that is not basically guesswork is the first one we're going to talk about. The main event will be Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan, which, if you beat Charles Oliveira in this day and age, you deserve a crack at Islam Makhachev. And it's a rematch, as a lot of you will know. And Arman has definitely earned the right to try and get that win back. Will he get it back? I don't believe he will. But he's definitely earned this opportunity, and he is the rightful number one contender. And to be fair, the first fight was quite interesting, and Arman was very young at the time. So we'll see what happens. UFC 311's co-main event for me should be Zhang Weili against Virna Jandiroba now. Virna was supposed to fight Tatiana Suarez in December. Unfortunately, Suarez is injured. As far as we know, Virna is healthy and ready to go. So I think who she's already beaten, the win streak that she's currently on, already warrants a shot at 115 for the belt. Is she much of a threat to Zhang Weili? I don't believe so. But yeah, that's what I would do. I'd do Islam versus Arman and Zhang Weili versus Virna Jandiroba. We know that UFC 312 will take place in Australia. We do not know its main and co-main event. I did a cheeky card builder on this not long ago. If you've not seen it, check it out. I'm very proud of it. And in that video, I said that the main event will be a middleweight title rematch between Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis. And the co-main event will be a 5-round featherweight fight between Volkanovski and Diego Lopez. I'm going to stick with that. Alright people, the obvious elephant in the room is Khamzat Chimaev. He was beyond impressive against Robert Whittaker. He was superb. My problem with Khamzat Chimaev is, based on what we know, is he able to go from October to February, a 4-month turnaround? Is he capable of doing that and actually sticking to it and showing up? I'm not entirely sure. Sean Strickland will fight you on an hour's notice. And these two have kind of been in line for a rematch ever since the first one ended. I think Strickland probably deserves it as well. Leave Chimaev on the bench for a bit. He'll get the winner. And I'll talk about that later in the video. But I think Strickland and DDP need to settle this and have a rematch, because the first one was razor thin. And then Volkanovski against Lopez. I hate the idea of an interim belt on this particular matchup. I also don't particularly like the idea of Volkanovski going straight back into a fight with Ilia Topuria. He's lost more than he's won recently. Let's see him beat a contender. Still have it over 5 rounds. I think Volkanovski is definitely a 5-round fighter. And it would be nice to see Lopez over a longer distance as well, and kind of see how he handles that. I think Lopez would win as well, which is sad, but I do. I think he's fresher. I think he's got a lot of ways to win. I think he hits very hard. I think his grappling is brilliant. Volkanovski is downtailing on his career. There's no two ways about that. And if he does lose, especially if it's badly, in his home country against a guy who doesn't hold a belt, we'll see what happens with the future of his career. But Volkanovski-Lopez makes sense for me, in a lot of ways. The UFC seem to like the idea of going to Miami in March, so I'm going to keep that tradition alive and say we're back at the Kaseya for UFC 313, headlined by a man who's already headlined that arena, Alex Pereira, finally fighting Magomed Ankalaev. There are a number of people you can point at as to why this fight hasn't already happened. Maybe Alex doesn't really fancy Magomed. Maybe the UFC doesn't really want to risk Alex against a guy like Magomed. Maybe Magomed needs to be more active. Whichever way you look at it, it has to happen, and it has to happen now. If Alex wants a concrete light heavyweight legacy that he can then take up to heavyweight in the future, he needs Ankalaev on his resume. And to be honest, I'm leaning towards him winning. I wasn't for a while, but I suppose I fell into that Ankalaev's a wrestler thing. If you watch him fight, he's kind of not. I mean, he can wrestle, and he's done brilliant against Jan Blachowicz, for example. Used some brilliant offensive wrestling in that particular fight. But he's not a shoot 6 takedowns around, lean on you against the cage, kind of foot stomp you kind of guy. He doesn't do that to people. There will be a lot of time where they're in open space and Alex will find his chin at some point. I guarantee you, Alex Pereira beats Magomed Ankalaev in Miami in March. And as for the co-main event, the bantamweight title is on the line. In my opinion, I would do Merab Dvalishvili against Umar Nurmagomedov. Now, Umar Nurmagomedov has one ranked win. If you have said to me that there's a contender who is undeniable for a title shot, having only had one ranked win, I'd call you a donor. Unfortunately, that would not be factoring in the quality of that win, which was Corey Sandhagen, who I genuinely believed was going to win the title. I thought he was going to beat Umar and then beat either O'Malley or Merab. But Umar proved that as much as he may not have elite experience, he is elite in his own right. I think him against Merab is not the most fan-friendly encounter, to be honest. I think Umar's a better striker than Merab. I think Merab will be better over the 5 rounds. I think it goes 5 rounds. But I think Umar wins on the cards. I think he does a lot of damage early. And he really kind of gets ahead in the cards. I could see Merab maybe coming back towards the end of the fight. But I'm going to say that Umar dethrones Merab Dvalishvili in Miami. The UFC love coming to the UK in the first quarter of a year, and we love having them. So let's do a UK card in early April with the main event of Tom Aspinall versus Alexander Volkov 2 for the undisputed heavyweight title, because John Jones is going to beat Stipe Miocic, and then he's either going to retire or he's going to be sort of, oh, I don't know, and we'll get to January and February, still not made his choice, and Dana needs to put his finger out and say, either you sign and fight your interim champion now that you're back and you're active, or we strip you, dickhead. Do you know what I mean? Whether Dana has the minerals to do that to his own son, or at least he'd make you think he's his child, the way he talks about him, remains to be seen. But if everything is right in the world, it will be Tom Aspinall against the winner of Gane Volkov 2. And Volkov's been looking superb recently. I've been really impressed with him. I think he beats Cyril Gane in a rematch and gets himself a rematch of his own against Tom Aspinall. Back in London, or anywhere in the UK really, this time with the heavyweight championship on the line. Why not? And underneath that, on that April pay-per-view card, I would have another 5-round non-title fight of Leon Edwards and Joaquin Buckley, because it's almost a prediction within a prediction. I believe that he gets the better of Ian Gary. I'm going to have a video out where I break down all the big fights left in 2024 very soon. I'm going to talk in more detail about Ian Gary versus Joaquin Buckley, but long story short, I think he gets through it. And at 170 pounds, when Leon Edwards lost the bout against Bilal Muhammad, it completely flipped the weight class on its head. If Bilal Muhammad then loses it in his first title defence against Shavkat Rakhmonov, for an example, it's flipped again, and it brings Leon straight back into contention. And if he's just beaten Ian Gary, he's beaten Wonderboy, he's beaten Luque. If Joaquin Buckley can then add a win over Leon Edwards, who has a couple of wins over Usman, and he's beaten Covington, then why not give him the title shot? Over 5 rounds in London. Joaquin Buckley doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who would be particularly bothered about going to London. I'm sure he'd fight in China, Brazil, the UK. If it was a title eliminator, he'd fight on the moon, that bloke. So, Leon Edwards versus Joaquin Buckley in April in the UK. Like I've already said, people, I believe, just like there has been this year and the year previous, there will be months with more than one pay-per-view. And I have a feeling April might be one in 2025. And I think that is where we finally get what at that point will be a unification bout between Bilal Muhammad and Shavkat Rakhmonov. And even if it's not unification and Shavkat doesn't fight at UFC 310, he's still the number 1 contender. And if he does have to go through an Usman beforehand, I think he does. So either way, I think we are going to get him and Bilal Muhammad for the undisputed welterweight title in the early part of next year. I agree with a lot of the MMA world where I say that I make Shavkat a relatively big favourite. Not huge, not like minus 300-400, but sort of minus 210, 230, somewhere around there as a favourite over Bilal Muhammad. I think he does beat him. The co-main event I've put on that card is inspired by something Dana White said quite recently. Max Holloway still has the BMF title. It was not won by Ilia Topuria in that fight. He still has it. So, you've got 2 options. You either kind of leave it and do nothing with it, or you add in the fact Max wants to fight at lightweight now, and you do Max Holloway versus Dan Hooker over 5 rounds in a co-main event of a pay-per-view for the BMF belt. Don't need to say any more there, you're already sold. Let's move on. The month of May, headlined by Conor McGregor versus Charles Oliveira. You have to be a bit fruity if you're going to make a prediction video, people, especially one that's so far-fetched and is basically all complete guesswork. So, if Michael Chandler beats Oliveira, he does not earn a title shot because of his inactivity and because of his previous losses. If Charles Oliveira beats Michael Chandler in December, we already know that Islam's fighting Arman, and we then know that he has Ramadan later in the year. So the earliest we can expect him is at the back end of 2025. So, to fill the gap, earn a few million, and beat Conor McGregor, which he would, by the way. So I kind of see Oliveira Chandler now as like a McGregor sweepstake, if I'm honest. And I think Oliveira beats Chandler, therefore we get Conor versus Oliveira. I love it. And in the co-main event, another 5-rounder, Israel Adesanya versus Cal Barajo. Adesanya needs to stay away from title fights. He needs to rebuild. Cal Barajo is deserving of a chance like this. So, let's do it, man. June, International Fight Week, which would end up being UFC 317, I believe this would be at this point. Dricus du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev. Now, I know I said earlier that Khamzat is unlikely to turn around in 4 months. If you give him 8, and you give him until next June, kind of pending whether he can actually enter the USA, he says he can, so we'll take him at his word. I believe that Dricus du Plessis beats Sean Strickland again, more convincingly in a rematch, and off the strength of that Robert Whittaker win, Khamzat Chimaev does deserve a title shot in his next fight, so let's do it. And the co-main event, probably one of the biggest women's combat sports fights you can make at the moment is, surprisingly in a way, Juliana Pena versus Kayla Harrison, because Juliana Pena has been so desperate to fight Amanda Nunes, and Kayla Harrison has been almost kind of mentioned in a fight with Nunes ever since she came to mixed martial arts. You'll see what I've got cooking later in the video, but watch this space. Kayla Harrison does deserve a title shot, and she will get it. I think she'll get it in June. And I believe that headlining in July will be Ilia Topuria versus Diego Lopez, who's just beaten Alexander Volkanovski. Potentially by finish, when you consider the fact that Volkanovski's been finished in both of his last 2 matchups, but maybe just over 5 rounds, we will see. Maybe do this in like a Houston, Texas kind of vibe. It's been a while since we've had a pay-per-view in Texas. That could be quite cool to see. But make no bones about it, people. I believe that Ilia Topuria would beat Diego Lopez. He hits harder. I think his submission game is better. I think Lopez's is very good. They're quite close down there, I believe. But I think Ilia Topuria would be a solid favourite in that fight. And the co-main, Valentina Shevchenko against Manon Fiorot, because Manon Fiorot has a win over Erin Blanchfield. That looks even better after Erin just completely dominated Rose Namajunas, which she did. So, you make that fight happen. She's earned it. It's not exactly particularly good for fanfare, but Valentina as flyweight champion I think is the best thing for the division. So let's get her defending it again. August, I'm feeling a Brazil pay-per-view, and who better to headline a pay-per-view in Brazil coming off the best win of his career against Magomed Ankalaev than Alex Pereira in a rematch with Jan Blachowicz. Now, I don't think it would be fair or warranted in any way for Jan Blachowicz after such a big long layoff to jump straight in to a UFC light heavyweight title fight, but if he can get a win in the first 2 to 3 months of next year, that fight he had with Alex was supremely close. I thought he won it personally. That will factor in to his chances of getting that shot. I think a rematch between the two is a really good idea. And of course, Jan Blachowicz has that win over Adesanya, which kind of factors in, I guess, in a way, if you really can compare Izzy and Alex anymore. I think the debate's been over for a while, but the fact he has that adds another string to the bow of this fight, so to speak. So let's put it on again. And co-headlining a flyweight title fight, I think it should be Alejandro Pantoja against Royval again, because Pantoja has to get through Asakura first in December. I believe he does. Since his loss at UFC 296 to Pantoja, Royval's been very, very good. He beat up Brandon Moreno. He beat up Tatsuro Taira. He's warranted himself another crack at Pantoja for that flyweight belt. So let's do it. And September 25, I believe you go back into Salt Lake City, Utah, and you have another welterweight title fight headlining there, which we've seen in the past with Edwards and Usman. Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Joaquin Buckley. It's probably quite apparent at this point, people, but I am a big fan of Newman, so I was so impressed with his patience and his IQ in the fight against Wonderboy. Again, I'll go more into that in an in-depth look at the best fights remaining in 2024 video coming out soon, but I think you can use that against Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards and Ian Gary are similar in a lot of ways. Long rangey strikers, and so is Wonderboy in there as well. To put it simply, Leon Edwards doesn't like scraps. Leon Edwards likes a technical mixed martial arts encounter. Joaquin Buckley will fight him, and if you fight Leon Edwards, you've got a good chance of beating him. So I think he does. I'm going to be honest. And as the co-main event on that Salt Lake City card, I believe we will see the swan song of Dustin Poirier against Colby Covington, because Dustin Poirier has made it quite clear he's only got one left in him. He said he wants to retire in Louisiana, which would be a brilliant story, but I'm not sure if the UFC would go there just for him. If they did, he's definitely done enough in the sport for me to warrant that. but I can't see it happening. And if you look at 155, he's already said he's not interested in Dan Hooker. You can't really give him Oliveira or Chandler. I don't want to see him fight Gaethje again, even though it would complete their trilogy. I'm kind of just not interested. I am interested in him versus Covington because it's basically a watered down version of Covington Masvidal. In Salt Lake City, with the high altitude, it probably favours the cardio machine of Covington, but over 5 rounds, being able to carry more weight, maybe Poirier could put some hands on him and do some damage. We will see, and that's exactly it. I want to see it, so that's why it's in the video. Again, I think the UFC are probably likely to double up in October. It just makes sense with the scheduling and whatnot. So I think the early October card, which would be kind of a mirror of a Pereira versus Roundtree in terms of schedule from this year, I'm going to say Kayla Harrison versus Amanda Nunes, because when Kayla Harrison won her most recent fight, Amanda Nunes was posting in a workout gear. She was almost kind of hinting at something. I think Kayla Harrison is the only fight that Amanda Nunes would get up for. And if she can put a beating on Juliana Pena in June, like I put earlier in the video, which I believe she would, that would definitely excite Amanda Nunes. And I think the idea of fighting Nunes would definitely excite Kayla Harrison. It's the only way you bring Amanda back, I think. What I said earlier about the idea of Juliana Pena against Kayla Harrison being one of the biggest women's combat sports fights you can make at the moment, this would top it. The only fight that I think in the entirety of women's combat sports that's bigger than this is the upcoming fight, Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano. Nothing's bigger than this apart from that, if you ask me. Maybe Amanda Nunes against Clarissa Shields in a 2-fight deal. 1 boxing, 1 MMA. Maybe. But realistically, this would be the one. I know we don't really like women's MMA, but I'd be hyped for this. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see what would transpire if those two got in the octagon together. Hopefully we see it. Let's hope. Do you know what I mean? Pack your bags and book your flights, people, because just like we did this year, late October, I'm saying the UFC goes back to the Middle East. Could be Abu Dhabi, could be Saudi Arabia, anywhere around there. Maybe Qatar if they could get that done. Something like that. And the headliner would be Islam Makhachev against Charles Oliveira, the rematch. Because if Islam can beat Arman in January, which I believe he will, and in my little alternate universe I've made here, Charles Oliveira beats Michael Chandler in December, and then Conor McGregor in May, you run that back. They were supposed to fight, obviously, at UFC 294, I believe. I think that was the event. Yeah, it was. There would be no other options, really. I mean, if Max Holloway can beat Dan Hooker and remain BMF champion, you could argue for it, but I want to see Islam Oliveira too. Probably Charles' last chance at being world champion, which may be sad if he gets beat again, which he probably would be, but you know what I mean? Let's see. Charles Oliveira is a danger to anybody at any second of a fight, on the feet and on the ground. We all know that already, and Islam will know that as well. So, yeah, it's an intriguing one. It's a fun one. It's one of the biggest fights you can make in the sport, I believe. So, yeah, I'd love to see them run it back. In the co-main event, I believe Umar Nurmagomedov will fight Merab Dvalishvili at the start of 2025, beat him, and then defend his bantamweight title against Davison Figueiredo. I fancy him to beat Piotr Jan. If he can become a 2-weight world champion across flyweight and bantamweight, he should be ranked very high pound for pound. Do I believe he would beat Umar? Not from what I've seen so far at 35 from him, no. But who knows? If he can beat Jan and look good, you should definitely give him a title shot. Square Garden of Madison, November 2025. Now, you've already seen it. You can see it on your screen in my lovely artistic slide. Khamzat Chimaev versus Israel Adesanya, because, hear me out, right? Hear me out. If Israel Adesanya gets a win at middleweight and Khamzat Chimaev is world champion, the UFC will make that fight. Whether you believe it's warranted or not, doesn't really matter. They will make it and you lot will watch it. It's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. But, I mean, stylistically it's interesting. Do I believe Adesanya has a sniff of beating Khamzat Chimaev? Of course he does. Do I believe he does? No. No, I do not. Because Robert Whittaker is a better grappler than Israel Adesanya. And if Khamzat Chimaev can do what he did against Whittaker again to Dricus du Plessis, I'm even less confident that Adesanya can beat him. But, like I said, you mark my words, if Khamzat Chimaev is UFC middleweight champion and Israel Adesanya can get a win over a Calbarajo, like I said earlier, or even an Imavov if you want to do that one instead, they will give him the shot against Khamzat. It's a fresh matchup. And to be fair, we'd all lose our minds over it, so we can't really complain. Lads, I just got to make sure that you guys know there's so much guesswork in this video, man. I could be wrong on this in a month's time, like a year before the end of 2025. I could be wrong so quickly about this. There's so much guesswork, but I'm trying to make good content for you people. So I just want to get that in as a disclaimer. Let's move on. 2025 November UFC pay-per-view co-main event. Who fancies a super fight? Because I do. And to be honest, again, it's women's MMA. I've been looking at this fight for like 2 or 3 years thinking I'd love to see that shit. I really would. Valentina Shevchenko against Zhang Weili at flyweight for the belt. Come on now. The two of the most intriguing / exciting women's fighters on the roster. Zhang Weili would definitely be able to move up to flyweight. She'd be smaller than Valentina, there's no doubt about that. But if you look at her next to a Blanchfield or a Grasso, there's not a lot in it. I think it would be super intriguing. I think Zhang Weili would have a sniff at beating her as well. She's such a dense, like, physical kind of specimen, if you know what I mean. She could do some serious problems to Valentina on the feet and on the ground. So, yeah, if they can both defend their titles, do it. Let's see what happens. And finally, December, almost always at the T-Mobile in Las Vegas. Let's stack the bollocks off of it. And we're going to start with the main event. You're probably wondering where Tommy Aspinall went after he beat Volkov in this kind of weird reality I've made in April 25. Well, I've been saving it for this. Tom Aspinall, Alex Pereira to finish off 2025. If Aspinall is in the position that I think he will be, and if Alex Pereira is in the position that I think he will be at this time, this will be the biggest fight of the entire year. That's right, over Oliveira versus Conor, over the likes of Adesanya versus Hamza, or even Dricus versus Hamza. This would be a million buys. I genuinely believe that. That could be delusional. Let me know what you think, but this would break records. This would be... It's the best fight you can make in MMA right now, I believe. And especially if you add on what I already think will happen, like prior to this, it would just make it even bigger. I also think you could get Ilia Topuria out again before the end of 25. Just put him in there with like a Movzar Evloev or something. He seems to have a problem with all the Russians at the moment. So give him a Russian. I think he beats Aljamain Sterling in a few weeks' time. He probably needs one more. You could give him a Yair Rodriguez. You could give him a Volkanovski, maybe. Or even a Lopez in a rematch off his title fight loss. You could do that. But I think you end the year with Aspinall versus Pereira. Fuck me, that's good. And Ilia Topuria versus Movzar Evloev as the co-main event. Lads, I really enjoy making these kind of videos for you beautiful people. I love the idea of looking into the future and trying to like matchmake off of a fight. A prediction, like so many of these fights are based off me having to make a call on a previous fight and then put them into a new one kind of thing. I love doing that kind of thing. And I just love matchmaking in general, as I'm sure you know. If you've seen any of my content, you know most of it is matchmaking. But with that being said, this video is complete. Hope you enjoyed, and chaps, I'll talk to you very soon. Bye bye.